People on the forums usually say disconnecting your front sway bar will help with cornering. I think it's not necessary, but I'd like to hear your opinion. So if I remember rightly, Nate, I think you might have been the person before that was asking about front wheel drive setup. So assuming that's the case, yeah, so what's going on there when people are talking about getting the car to, when people are typically struggling with understeer, one of the things you can do is, it's all about that lateral load transfer distribution. That's a bit of a long-winded term, but all it means is the relative roll stiffness you have on the front axle with respect to the rear. And the main tools that we've got to adjust that are our springs, our anti-roll bars, and also via our roll center, which I talked about a little bit before as well. So let's say from a really simple perspective, really simplified, if I've got a car that's understeering, one of the more common ways to try and tune that understeer out is to reduce the amount that the front axle is reacting in terms of its load distribution. So that's a really maybe a complicated way of saying you need to soften the front axle or stiffen the rear. Now that's one approach to changing the balance, and that's what's going on there when people are talking about removing the front anti-roll bar. It's because if you remove the front anti-roll bar from the system, you've softened the front axle, and as a result the rear axle will now take a higher proportion of the total lateral load transfer, which is something I talked about before in terms of that vertical load sensitivity of the tires. Because the rear axle is now stiffer with respect to the front, it means the rear axle is now going to transfer more of the total lateral load transfer. That outside rear tire is essentially losing some of its grip because you've reduced its coefficient of friction, and that's what's making, theoretically, that's what's making the car more balanced or reducing the amount of understeer. Now that is one approach. If you're running your car on track, I definitely wouldn't usually recommend disconnecting your anti-roll bar. I would, through disconnecting your front anti-roll bar, that's a pretty extreme way to go ahead and look for front end grip and reducing your understeer. I would be much more in the opposite end of the opposite camp, probably things like I talked a little bit about front wheel drive roll center correction kits before. That's certainly something I'd be looking at if your car is lowered, which I assume it probably is. Then you should definitely look at doing a roll center correction. That will quite likely bring you back into a more sensible lateral load transfer distribution window where you won't need to do anything as extreme as remove your front anti-roll bar. You can also look at changing things like spring stiffnesses, maybe even uprating the rear anti-roll bar. But I think a missed trick that a lot of people get wrong is not looking at roll center correction as a first step when you've gone ahead and lowered your car. That question was taken from one of our free live lessons. If you like free stuff and you want to expand your knowledge, click the link in the description to claim your free spot to our next live lesson. You'll learn about optimizing the performance and handling of your car on the racetrack, as well as improving your skills behind the wheel. Plus, you'll have the chance to ask your own questions, which we'll be answering live.